Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and the winner for the poll for today's primary video, at any rate, is whether or not the EU will grant an extension. So it's probably worth exploring here who it is that gets the decision for this. So effectively, it's the European Council. Donald Tusk is the president of the European Council. The Council also includes the heads of all the governments of all the member states, the president of the European Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, and the High Representative of the Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Federica Mogherini, and the president of the Council himself, obviously. Now, the European Council has to unanimously decide on whether to extend the Article 50 process as laid down in Article 50. Now, I've never actually gone through this process before, so I can't be absolutely certain, but my reading of that would be that also suggests that the non-head of government members would also have to agree. But that being said, I would have thought politically, I can't imagine that any of those would vote against it if the unified judgment of all the heads of government was for it. So as such, you're probably saying it's the heads of government who really make the decision. Certainly, reporters have only been talking about that as well. So either they all unanimously agree to an extension that meets with the approval of Theresa May, of course, because she is also on the council, or a single member says no. So although for all of the member states it will essentially be up to their heads of government, Theresa May actually can't make the decision on her own unilaterally. She needs a majority in Parliament to agree as well in order to amend the exit date as laid down by the European Union Withdrawal Act. So as MPs have been told time and time again, you can only change statute with statute. EU statute doesn't need changing because Article 50 allows for an extension without any change to statute. All it says is that 2 years is the default position. If either you haven't concluded your agreement beforehand, in which case it doesn't even have to be 2 years, or you all unanimously agree to extend it to whenever. So the other heads of government don't need to consult their parliament, but UK statute does need changing, and so Theresa May does. So we know that Theresa May will be asking the EU Council for an extension. What we don't know is when she'll be asking and for what she'll be asking specifically, and whether or not she will accept any conditions that are attached to an offer. So what have the other members of the Council been saying this week? So Donald Tusk, President of the Council, he has been urging the EU to grant a long extension if the UK agrees to change its strategy and seek consensus. Now, the problem is that quite a lot of people in the UK are seizing on the first part of his statement and almost ignoring the rest. Yes, he's asking the Council to consider granting a long extension, but he's also asking the UK to drop May's red lines and for the House of Commons to deliver a majority vote on a way forward. Neither of those things have happened as yet, and at the moment, neither of those things have appeared likely. Jean-Claude Juncker, on the other hand, does not favour an extension beyond the new European Parliament sitting this summer. This may come as no surprise, as it's the Commission that's had to try and mould the Brexit negotiations into a legal framework. And given that the UK's position for the longest time has been one of legal unicorns, to keep using the phrase, that's not been an easy task for them. They're probably sick of the whole thing and just want it to be over. Their focus is on legal frameworks, less on economic or political matters, though they're not exactly blind to those either. In Germany, Angela Merkel has not really said much herself recently on the subject of an extension. It's considered likely that they would want to support one, however. Some of her advisors have even advocated an extension without a plan, but I don't think that would be unanimously agreed on the Council, and it also has to be said it's not their decision, it would be Merkel's decision from the part of view of Germany. Emmanuel Macron of France, on the other hand, is taking a much harder line, and he is certainly talking at the moment. He has spoken out about granting an extension, but only with strict conditions. He has spoken out against granting it, that just prolongs the process. If that's all it seems to do, he's not at all in favour of that. After all, you've got to bear in mind the UK is nowhere near ready for a deal, or a no deal, I should say, rather, either legally or in terms of systems. The EU has been enacting legislation for some time in readiness to carry on doing business as best they can, and they've been testing out their systems. It's not to say that he isn't open to an extension for a few weeks for the UK to sort statute books out, but he seems to be suggesting that he'd block a longer delay without a definite plan that has support in the UK Parliament. Italy's taken a similar line to France. They're insisting that for their support, the UK needs to provide a plan and a timescale. They're also preparing for no deal, rolling out legislation and information campaigns to cope in the event of a no deal. In fact, it looks like all EU countries have legislated and planned for something to do with a no deal exit, with the exception of the UK. Now, I've not seen what the Polish Prime Minister has been saying this week, but the Foreign Minister has said that no deal is the worst of all worlds and that they would back an extension to avoid it. Now, I can't imagine that the Polish, or any Polish cabinet minister, never mind just the Foreign Minister, would be talking so positively about what Poland's position is on Brexit without it being at least shared with the Prime Minister. So that probably puts paid to any idea that UK Brexiteers are able to persuade Poland to block an extension request. There has certainly been some of that reported. After all, the UK is a huge market to Poland. They are one of the EU countries that would be quite badly affected by a no-deal Brexit, so the chances of them refusing an extension if the rest of the council wants to grant it just because Aaron Banks says so is unthinkable. Same applies to the Netherlands, really. They don't believe that an extension without a plan solves anything, but nor are they saying they wouldn't support it anyway. So I'd take that to suggest that they'll go along with the rest of the council. They're not going to push a particular decision. They don't want no deal, but they are prepared for it. Interestingly, the Australian Foreign Minister suggested that a solution would be found at the last minute that meant no delay would be needed. Now, I have no idea what he is smoking, because even if 75 MPs suddenly about face next week and vote for May's deal, that is still not enough time to get it ratified in the rest of the EU and for the UK to copy EU laws across before having to repeal the Communities Act. If we don't get an extension of a month or so for that, then there's still quite a lot of our current laws which will cease to apply in the UK. Another thing I came across I thought was interesting is there's a suggestion that hasn't actually been earnest discussions amongst the council on this. I thought for sure that there'd been some sort of wargaming on it to test out different scenarios and agree a position ahead of time, but reporters have been told that this is not the case and they're simply waiting for May's proposal before considering it. Now, they could just be saying this to convey a weariness about the whole thing and a readiness to just let no-deal Brexit happen if it must, or it may be that the EU summit at the end of next week really will have a lot of negotiations on the issues. Now, given that the summit negotiations are planned well in advance, if that's the case, then it's almost certain that this was always the date when a request for an extension was planned to come. It may also be that a conclusion has already been planned in advance. Conspiracy time. And I'm sure we won't find out what the response is until the end of next week at least. So what are the possible outcomes as I can see them? One is, of course, a refusal. Now, I know a lot of people in the EU are just sick of it and want it over. In fact, quite frankly, a lot of people in the UK do as well. But just as in the UK, EU politicians and diplomats are used to this sort of apparently endless debate, and it doesn't wear them down as it might for ordinary citizens who are not used to negotiations that take years and years. What's happened over Brexit isn't really that different to what happens in trade and political negotiations between nations since politics existed. The indication from Brussels is that no member of the council is completely opposed to an extension. But some are insisting on conditions, of course, I've already said. So it might be the case that if there is a refusal, it'll be because just one member turns down the extension offer, the UK. 2, Parliament accepts May's deal on the third time. We request a short extension to sort out the details. The EU agrees so that they can ratify it as well. Then the real tough talking begins, but I think I'll wait to see if and when that happens before I bother to go through all that. 3, Parliament rejects May's deal. The EU refused to give an answer at the summit, which allows May the following week to hold a fourth vote with literally 1 day left to go before Brexit. MPs then face a deal or no deal scenario. Some of the older MPs collapse in the voting lobby and ambulances have to be called. Jacob Rees-Mogg spontaneously combusts and the Houses of Westminster, or the Palace of Westminster I should say, burns down. But if the deal passes, we get the short technical extension, I suppose, at the last minute. If it doesn't, then we're granted a long extension or no extension, and no deal it is. Or 4, the EU grants a long extension only on the condition of a credible plan. This would be veiled language for another referendum or a general election. Several heads of government are not really keen on a short extension for any reasons, other than the deal being approved, of course. because they don't want Brexit hanging over the European elections, whether or not the UK takes part in them. But, you know, if the UK is still a member at that time, then legally we are supposed to take part in them. Even though we have come to some theoretical arrangement with the EU and what we could do to avoid that, some people may take us to court over it and we may be forced to fight them anyway. So my personal view is that there will be an agreement on some sort of extension. For what reason or for how long depends on the UK's plan, of course, and how EU leaders think it might impact the results of the European elections. After all, going to back to the idea of a conspiracy of sorts. Yes, it's possible that senior members of the council have already agreed a last-minute deal with May already. This is how things do sometimes work in politics on divisive issues. You pretend to go to the last minute, and sometimes it's not even pretending, sometimes it's actually the way it works, and then come out with a major shift, with a flourish that allows both sides to show that they've achieved something for their people, and also to show how hard they've been working, because it went right up to the last minute. And that seems to be important in politics. Yes, we must go right to the last minute to show that we've been working as hard as possible. But that usually only works out when the decisions are down to prime ministers and presidents, heads of government, to sort out. Whatever is agreed also needs agreement in the House of Commons, and they're certainly not in on any deals. They're very much a loose cannon at the moment. And it's not like the shift that may come is anything like what Brexiteers are hoping for. They just don't get it that what they're asking for is not legally possible. So that's the situation in terms of whether or not an extension would be granted. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button and subscribe for further content. And also click on the channel name where you can go to the poll to vote for future topics as well. And until next time, I'll see you later.